So in order to be on PN, you have to have a permanent IV. That's usually a central IV that goes right into the heart. And whenever there's an IV, there's an infection risk. So you're at increased risk of infections, which is the third side. Transplant is wild. I mean, even if you kind of the first person who thought up transplant, it was like a doctor or somebody that was talking to their friend, and they were just like, what if we take the organs of somebody who's passed away and put them in another person?
Did you have to wait so long to get a transplant done?
Because I'm stubborn.
Really?
I'm very stubborn. Oh, you need a transplant. And I immediately was like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't like being here. Why would I get a transplant? That means I would be here more. I came here for work, not for you.
Yeah, I wonder if the person that died that gave you it screaming at you drink more water, take better care.
Yeah, I'm trying so hard. It's either...
So now, are you just able to eat normally again? Are you just normal now?
Yeah, I can just eat and absorb. It's weird. I'm kind of freaked out by it all the time.
So can I say that entering a hospital, it's like entering a different dimension? Time doesn't exist. It either moves really slow or really fast. Your armor becomes weaker the moment you walk in the door, and it's a weird, eerie feeling. So we all know that in order to become an advocate and a leader, you must be healed from your medical PTSD before you can start helping others. So how do you deal with your own PTSD?
I had this epiphany when I was dancing with somebody, and it was just the weirdest thing. I remember dancing with him, and I was like, oh my God, he's not a doctor. He doesn't care how enlarged my spleen is. And I realized, yeah, I remember a therapist once told me, she's like, Emily, you've had a really hard life. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And she's like, no, you've had a significantly harder life than most people. And I remember when I heard that, I got a little kind of defensive. But then after thinking about it, I was like, yeah, so it's even acknowledging people with chronic and rare diseases have significantly harder lives than most people.
I think all of us have dealt, regular people have dealt with medical PTSD. No one really wants to go to the hospital ever. Even if they have insurance and stuff, they don't want to go just because they know how bad it is.
You shouldn't have to fight to be heard when you're already sick.
Totally agree.
It's more of take anger that comes with trauma, and instead of being destructive with anger, be constructive with it.
So I know you also talk to health practitioners. So what do you wish they would mother flippin' understand?
A lot.
Hello, welcome to my podcast. To my one Joe Suits. I am Joe Suits, and I'll be giving a mic to Emily. Emily, the medical PTSD expert, both handling and offering support. She holds bi-weekly meetings for medical PTSDers through her P.O.P organization. Excited to have you. How are you today?
Good. I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. It's a pleasure to have you today. So today we will be talking about medical PTSD. I mean, nobody really wants to talk about it, but I think it's important to have the conversation.
I would agree. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's kind of one of those things that we were saying earlier about therapy. Nobody really wants to do it, but it's good for you. And then once you kind of start talking about it, then you're like, oh, now I'm into talking about it.
Well, you have to get over the hard part first, because it's always the first few sessions is always the hardest.
Yeah.
And then you have to go in it for the long term. You can't just do it short and then back out.
It's not a one quick fix.
Yeah. So first I want to talk about your journey and how you got here. I have here you were diagnosed with, I think you pronounce it pseudo-obstruction.
Chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction.
Which means her body had difficulty moving food, fluid, and air through her intestines. She was dependent on nutrition through IV, or called parenteral nutrition, and you received a small bowel transplant in 2020. You said that parenteral nutrition has given you nasty complications. Can you talk more of those nasty complications?
Yeah. So long-term parenteral nutrition can have a lot of secondary side effects, because at the end of the day, our body was designed to process food instead of, the chemical equivalent of food. So some of the long-term complications of being on parenteral nutrition is liver failure from like fatty liver, because you have to have lipids in the PN. And then that's a lot of lipids for your liver to process over a short period of time, whereas when you eat, you process a little fat and then you take a break and then you eat again. So it's quite broken up for the livers of people who eat, but on parenteral nutrition, it's just kind of like a bunch of fat at once. The second thing is vascular access. So in order to be on PN, you have to have a permanent IV. That's usually a central IV that goes right into the heart, and whenever there's an IV, there's an infection risk, so you're at increased risk of infections, which is the third side effect. And a lot of these infections can be quite deadly. Kind of think of an IV as like the carpool lane into your heart, and bacteria, they just, our insides are all warm and like full of nutrients. Bacteria want to be there. And then whenever the IV goes bad because of infection and it's pulled, you have to put it somewhere else. And that can irritate the veins over time or affect their development. And so you can lose vascular access because there's only 4 or 5 points in the body that you can put in a central IV. And when they get infected, you could lose one of those sites. And so 2 of the best sites are in your IJ on your chest wall. But if those go bad, you have to do your legs, which is another increase of infection, and then there's one on your back, which is kind of like the last resort. So of all those complications, I had all 3, which put me as a candidate for transplant as soon as possible.
Wait, so why did you have to have all 3 areas then?
Oh no, what I was saying, for all those 3 complications of being on parenteral nutrition,
Okay.
I had all 3 of those complications.
So like you mentioned that like one where you eat a little bit and then you stop. So like how is your diet? Like is it the IV a supplement, or is it like your main source of your nutrients?
I mean, I ate for fun, but I didn't absorb any of it. And so that was just a comparison of people who can eat and people who can't eat and absorb what they eat. So for people who can eat, their livers get little breaks between meals to emulsify the fats, or not emulsify, process it. Whereas it's just nonstop 12 hours of processing fat for people who are on parenteral nutrition. And there are ways to kind of offset that, but it's just hard on your liver regardless.
So you're saying you've been on this till 2020 when you got your transplant?
Yeah, I was on parenteral nutrition starting when I was 6, and I was dependent on it up until 2020.
I'm guessing is you get the surgery, or not surgery, but you get the procedure done, and then the rest is up to you at home?
Oh, no, they make sure. So after the transplant, I was still on parenteral nutrition because, of course, your body needs to heal. And they slowly move you from IV nutrition to tube feeds, and then from tube feeds to eating. So at the beginning, I was eating a lot of soft foods in very small amounts, sometimes just literally a spoonful of yogurt, and then I was like, I'm done. And so they slowly kind of bring you up to speed, outpatient, but you're seen every week in clinic to do labs, to make sure you're not rejecting things, to see how progress is going, for them to say, okay, it's great that you had a cup of yogurt. How about this week try having a cup and a half, or try eating some really soft cooked carrots.
So is it like your body gets not used to having food for a long, long time? So now you're just...
Yeah, there's a lot of people on PN who don't eat at all. I did, just because I love food. But I can't imagine the journey it is to go from not eating at all to eating. I was fortunate in that I never was on tube feeds. I had some complications getting the tube that you put the tube feeds through in my body in the right place, so they ended up just giving up. And so I went from TPN to just eating, but that's because I already had the habit of eating.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't do a nasal tube, because that's a very temporary...
I had one of those when I first woke up, but it was to empty my stomach.
Oh.
Because your stomach constantly produces gastric juices, so as to get that stuff out so it wouldn't go into the intestine. But they hurt. I don't want one.
Well, you said that it was a temporary one, so I just assumed they needed to, when you mentioned tube feeding, but I actually have a tube, so
Yeah.
I mean, everything's fine for me, so it's weird that they just gave up.
They tried a lot. It wasn't that they were like, well, it didn't work the first time.
Yeah.
They tried a couple of times, and eventually I was the one that was like, can I just eat?
You
Can I
just
just like
like you
eat?
just like skipped a step basically.
Yeah, I skipped a step. So I stayed on PN a little longer. Like I wasn't just a lot of people I hear when they're discharged from their transplant, they're discharged off of PN. So I was discharged still on PN and eating while I got up to speed eating. So yeah, I skipped a step because I was like, I never had 2 Ps in the beginning. Just let me eat.
No, it's just crazy the amount of science involved in all of this. Like able
Oh
to
my
like
God.
putting the when you were talking about the IV into like, your heart. I didn't know that was a thing till like 6 months ago, and I'm like blown away that's possible, and like it's safe, but it's like really really high risk. But it's like
Yeah.
amazing that you can just do that. Like I'm just blown away by all of it.
Transplant is wild. I mean, even if you like kind of the first person who thought up transplant, it was like a doctor or somebody that was like talking to their friend and they were just like, what if we take the organs of somebody who's passed away and put them in another person?
I mean,
Like,
imagine being the patient. Like, hey, we're gonna like try this. You don't know if it's gonna work or you're gonna die, but please
it was
come back
probably
to
their
life.
last resort.
No, it's it. So I'm curious of why did you have to wait so long to get a transplant done?
Because I'm stubborn.
Really?
I'm very stubborn. So there's not every hospital is a transplant hospital, so not every doctor is always thinking transplant as a solution. I went to school in Boston and well, first let me start further back. My hospital in Missouri really wasn't quite equipped to handle a patient like me. There wasn't like right now in like these big tertiary hospitals, there's teams of people who like take care of PN and they're constantly changing the volume, changing the calories, the lipids. They're just up to speed on, do we do fats every day? Do we do fats every other day? Do we use animal fats? Do we use small fats, which is lipids that come from non animals like olive oil and fish and so on and so forth. But my team in Missouri really wasn't equipped for that. So my team really consisted of the director of infectious disease who was just curious and a surgeon. And they, did as wonderful as they could have. But it just wasn't on they weren't thinking transplant. I had been evaluated for transplant and I wasn't accepted as a candidate. I actually remember reading old notes about my first transplant evaluation and them saying, like, inevitably, Emily will need a transplant, but hopefully we can put it off as far as possible. So then in Boston, they're not a transplant center, the hospital that I went to. And I remember kind of being discouraged to pursue transplant because, you're trading problems and, it's risky, especially for bowel transplants. Bowel transplants started kind of ramping up this century, whereas heart and kidney, we've been doing it for a while. So when I moved to the Washington, D.C. area, I remember, I moved for work. I was very focused on work. I was really kind of over being sick. I was like, I just I was getting line infections like nobody's business. I was getting, on average, 3 to 4 central line infections per year for the last 15 years. So it was kind of
Oh, that's
normal for me.
high.
I know. People usually gasp when they hear that. But my kind of sense was like, I'm not gonna let this slow me down. I'll go to the hospital. I bounced back really quickly. So then, you get out of the hospital and you go on with things. There wasn't really any kind of other options for me at the time. So my thought was like, why dwell on it? So when I moved to the DC area, I made that very clear to my doctor. I mean, she immediately was like, oh, you need a transplant. And I immediately was like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't like being here. Why would I get a transplant? That means I would be here more. I came here for work, not for you. And it took her a year to convince me to just even sit down with the transplant surgeon. It was, I think, a lack of. I've had a total of 3 transplant evaluations. The first 2 I didn't pass, and of course, this last one I passed and I got the transplant. But it was kind of this combination of not being quite sick enough, being at hospitals that weren't transplant hospitals and didn't have that in mind. And then me just being stubborn and being like,
How
it's
do you?
fine. I'm fine.
Yeah. How do you fail a transplant test?
Oh, I just wasn't like you have to like I didn't have liver disease at the time. Like you have to hit like I think you have to hit one of the three factors that I mentioned.
Okay.
And at that, the line infections didn't start until maybe I was 14 and my last evaluation was when I was 13. So
But
I wasn't deemed sick enough.
I know you said you're stubborn, but you also couldn't do it even if you wanted to since you failed the first two tests.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're treating problems. So we talked about your IV problem, but now like what new problems do you have with your new transplant?
I'm very, very fortunate in that I've done very, very well with this transplant. Some of the, of course, one of the things that you switch is I'm on immune suppression meds, which are hard on your kidneys. So I could have kidney disease later on or need a kidney transplant.
Yeah, that's the one where
But
you have to take it like every single day, right? So it doesn't reject it.
yeah, exactly. But I know of people who've gotten bowel transplants and they rejected it, or they have, really debilitating constant diarrhea, or, they're still not able to eat or drink enough, or they, have some electrolyte imbalances that are still being investigated. So I think it was in the past couple of months that I realized how lucky I was. I mean, I am at the same, quality of life as I was before. I'm not in pain. I do get tired, but it's like because I'm not as good about drinking water as I should be, and I'm working on it. But then I just drink a bunch of water and then I feel fine again, versus like it being like like a chemical thing or something. So I really drew a very good card.
Yeah, I wonder if the person that died that gave you it like screaming at you like drink more water, take better care.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm trying so hard. It's either I'm supposed to drink 2 liters a day, and it's either I get it or nothing. There's
Like,
no in between.
do you even know who you got it from?
I don't know them by name. I still am working on writing a letter. I do know it was a young man.
Oh, you could just write thanks.
I want to, my transplant was between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which means some family lost their young son between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so it's like, how do you find the right words, or what do you say about yourself? Like, what direction do you take the card?
You're carrying, like, he didn't die in vain, like you're carrying it. He's still being used today.
Yeah.
And, like, it made you be not in pain then. So now, are you just able to eat normally again? Like, are you just normal now?
Yeah, I can just eat and absorb. It's weird. I'm kind of freaked out by it all the time.
Yeah, that must be so strange that you went 20 years of being on this IV, and then all of a sudden you could just start eating whatever you want and just be fine?
Yeah. I'm about to go to Seattle, and I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that I just need to bring a suitcase with my clothes in it instead of all my medications, and TSA probably isn't going to stop me because the past 20 years, I always get a pat down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I had an ostomy, I had an IV, and it would always like alarm off. Like, those fancier like scan things where you're like in the circle and you have to like stand there and it scans
And
your
put your
whole
hands
body.
up and...
Yeah, all that stuff. You're not gonna find anything.
I guess you did never thought that this life would be possible for you, so you must feel amazing. You
No,
must
I
feel...
never thought it was gonna be like
Yeah, you
this.
must feel like very like blessed every time you get to eat a meal. Like, I
Yeah,
don't know if you're like religious or not, but like you're like thankful to yourself when everyone is like, oh, whatever, but you're just so thankful.
Yeah, I think I'm very thankful that despite this illness, I've made it this far. But the funny thing about it is, even though this is all new, there's a part of it where I'm like, I've been doing this forever. Like, I don't know, it feels like the real me is out more because I feel more comfortable, I feel more confident, I'm a lot less timid. So a part of it is I wake up and I'm like, was that all a dream?
Well, that's a great segue to our next section. So we're gonna get into the big topic that Emily is the expert in. So it's medical PTSD. So everyone can pretty much assume Emily has been in and out of hospital and dealing with doctors and healthcare and all of that jazz. So can I say that like entering a hospital, it's like entering a different dimension. Time doesn't exist. It either moves really slow or really fast. Your armor becomes weaker the moment you walk in the door, and it's a weird, eerie feeling.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Exactly. I mean, like it's another world. It's a world that where boundaries don't exist because people just walk in, they just start feeling you or lifting your shirt or whatever.
Are you talking about the TSA now or the hospital?
The hospital. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is an entirely different world. I think what makes another thing that makes the hospital a different world is, as young adults, as older adults, we have more autonomy. We do our own thing. We have more freedom in our decisions. And then the second you walk into the hospital, you're on their schedule. So
So I
like they
want
tell you when to eat. They tell you, when to go down for like labs or a scan or something. I can't tell you how many times I'd been looking forward to some new episode on TV while I was in the hospital, and every time they're like, okay, time to go downstairs for something.
yeah, so I want to say like so Emily is the best to talk about medical PTSD because she's not only studying but also an advocate too. She serves as the Massachusetts pilot director for Health Advocacy Summit and on the MedStar Georgetown Hospital Patients and Family Advisory Council for Quality and Safety. A ton of words. She currently resides out of Washington D.C., working as a vocational especially within the disabled community. So we all know that in order to become an advocate and a leader, you must be healed from your medical PTSD before you can start helping others. So how do you deal with your own PTSD?
Once I acknowledged it, that's when kind of the gates opened. So for a long time, I did a lot of thought blocking, or I was in denial, or like the pieces just never came together. I was like, yeah, I had a hard childhood, but like I'm fine. I figured it out because one of my hobbies is ballroom dancing, and when I first started, I was really, really nervous, like significantly more nervous than people usually are. I couldn't make eye contact with the men that I was dancing with. I was really stiff, and it went on like this for like 6 months, and I never kind of lightened up. I had this epiphany when I was dancing with somebody, and it was just the weirdest thing. I remember dancing with him, and I was like, oh my God, he's not a doctor. He doesn't care how enlarged my spleen is. And I realized that healthcare system, there is this kind of objectification part of it where, they're always feeling your stomach and making notes about it and what needs to change. So ballroom dancing has been phenomenal in helping me realize, but then also kind of these calculated risks of being closer to people. And I will say it's especially men because a lot of the doctors when I was a child were men. So being in a dance frame with a guy and almost forcing myself to relax and remind myself that we are just dancing. He's not going to like judge me, tell me to change, tell me my organs are broken, whatever. And the dance community that I'm a part of, everybody's very encouraging of each other. So then like getting more out there, like, maybe doing some fancier steps or some arm styling and people like cheering you on. That was a big one. Another one's therapy, of course, processing, why I'm nervous about XYZ, and it usually boils down to my childhood in one way or another. I do a lot of self-talk, so like kind of like singing in the shower, only like almost narrating my own life in the shower to kind
been
of
been there, done that.
yeah, kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like trying to hear about your own life from a narrator helps you be more objective about your life and like less kind of lost in the emotions or just processing things out loud. Yeah, I think those have been the big ones. I mean, coping mechanisms such as breathing, or I realize that when I get nervous or embarrassed and my anxiety gets really high, I just tend to flee the scene. And so then stopping and thinking, okay, you're trying to flee the scene. What's wrong? What's the threat? Why do they feel like a threat? And then just sitting there, not interacting, but just still being there by just sitting there and just like letting the feeling kind of come and go without literally like running away.
I think go to a strip club. But I think the first thing, I think you nailed it. I think it's difficult for a lot of people is accepting the truth, because most people talk about it, but they kind of don't like accept the situation. I think that's a huge first step, and that's kind of really the hardest step out of every single step you take, is just accepting the situation as is, accepting the truth, and then how do you heal from that?
Yeah, I remember a therapist once told me, she's like, Emily, you've had a really hard life. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And she's like, no, you've had a significantly harder life than most people. And I remember when I heard that, I got a little kind of defensive. But then after thinking about it, I was like, yeah, so it's even acknowledging people with chronic and rare diseases have significantly harder lives than most people. And it's hard for people to understand that if they haven't been through it too.
Yeah, I mean, you're also not, I mean, we're comparing ourselves to each other, but we're like almost not comparing ourselves from day to day. So, like, I mean, you don't know, like, all you know is yourself. So you just assume that everyone that goes to the same thing. But in reality, it's definitely not like no one goes on IV for, 20 years and get a organ transplant. That's a rare occurrence. It's like, yeah, it's accepting the truth of it, like the actual truth, because like a lot of people can't accept the truth, which is really difficult. But the truth is there, and it comes down to the person if they want to accept it or not.
The truth will set you free.
And then therapy, and then so like you were talking about, like you were a ballerina, so like
Oh no,
before.
ballroom dance.
Sorry,
I'm
ballroom.
not strong enough to be a ballerina. I can't.
Yeah, so like you were talking about like you were so tense with like when you were a guy and stuff. So like before I met you, I actually didn't know medical PTSD was a term. So like, is it a new term, or is it like I did never heard of it?
You know, it's not an official term. It's more of like if you Google the term, you'll find like a lot of articles about it, but not like very little therapy. It's more of a word that I think comes up from the rare and chronic disease community, because if you Google it, or medical gaslighting on, I mean, not Google, if you search it on something like Instagram, it's very much out there, but it's not something that's medically acknowledged yet.
Yeah, like I have talked to like every other a lot of other guests, and they all had their forms of PTSD. And I just feel like before I started podcasting, I never even knew medical PTSD was even a thing, and it's totally valid. Like it's totally a real thing. Like you mentioned it in a rare and chronic world, but I think all of us have dealt, like regular people have dealt with medical PTSD. Like no one really wants to go to the hospital ever. Like even like if they have insurance and stuff, they don't want to go just because they know how bad it is.
Yeah, the ERs are like incredibly triggering places. But yeah, I mean, quote, normal people. I know somebody who, when she was 3, she broke her arm and had to wear a cast. And when it was time to take off the cast, you know, the doctor started sawing off the cast, and she started screaming, saying, "You're cutting my arm." And the doctor looked at her mother, didn't acknowledge her, looked at her mother and said, "I'm not cutting her." So they held her down to cut it. And when the cast came off, she indeed had this long cut down her arm.
Oh my
And
god.
so years later, when she's in her 30s, she goes to the dentist's office, and she just is in there, and you know, he lays her back, and she just starts sobbing and is really upset. And she realized later that that particular dentist chair she was in was very similar to the one she was in when her cast was cut off.
Oh no.
You know, she has a very clean medical history. I mean, the most significant thing was she had a small surgery at birth from, you know, some kind of development that didn't, kind of like, don't think, she didn't have like cleft lip, but like think cleft lip level of surgery where, you know, sometimes you just have to, like, the development's a little off, but very clean medical history.
Yeah, and then
she has medical PTSD.
Yeah, and then the thing that adds to it is that like I can understand if you're like in a domestic relationship and it's not toxic, and that like you can leave, but like you can't leave a hospital. Like it's there to help you, so you're always carrying
Exactly.
to go back regardless of what your previous experiences were. because there's no other option.
Well, yeah, and when we think of PTSD, we very often think of the veteran community because there's a lot of PTSD there. And one of the coping strategies, if let's say veterans triggered on 4th of July because of all the fireworks, saying the war is over, you're not there anymore. Can't really do that with medical PTSD because we're dependent on the hospitals.
Yeah,
We have to go back.
yeah, and so it's hard to really have a coping because at least if you're a veteran, you can kind of like you're in a war zone and you get away from it, and you
Yeah.
can still escape it maybe 80% of your life. But like medical, you just can't. And then like you mentioned, like so when we were talking about ballroom dancing, and you were talking with a guy, so the medical PTSD is not only in the hospital, but like in your life, depending on who you are, but like a lot of people's lives, it spreads to everything else. So it depends on, if it's triggered or like a huge tsunami. So like you become more anxious, drawn tight, and you shut down more.
Yeah. Well, I know a couple of patients where their medical trauma and their medical PTSD is so persistent, it affects how they seek medical care. They may delay going to the ER, they may put off going to clinical appointments, they may go to clinical appointments but not really remember what happened during it because they're in fight or flight response. And even there's patients that are completely disengaged. They're chronically ill or have a rare disease and they say, if I die, I die. I'm not going back to a doctor. So this is very important for providers to know because it impacts patient engagement and treatment outcomes.
And then the other thing is that also adds to it. So like everyone thinks of a hospital when you're like okay, but like when you have a rare disease or chronic illness, you're already weak already, and then you're already going into the situation that they won't understand you just because if you have a rare disease, like it makes sense that they wouldn't know everything because it's impossible to know everything, but you're already going in knowing that they might not even understand you or won't listen to you as well. Or like I've been through tons of interviews where like they'll say like do this test and I'll like show like what I need, and then the doctor will not listen to them at all. Like they think they know everything.
Yeah.
So like, you're weak already from whatever you're going through, and then you just become even weaker because no one's listening to you, and it is a really bad feedback loop. Like you don't want to go back, but then you have to go back. But then it's your health, and you can't fight it because then you just make yourself even worse long term. So like if you don't go now and you go later, you might be in the hospital even longer. So it's like it's extremely difficult to really do anything because it's the environment you have to go back to.
You shouldn't have to fight to be heard when you're already sick.
Totally agree. So we're gonna talk about your P.O.P organization, which is how did you come up with the word P.O.P?
So it stands for pissed off patients. It was actually an idea from my dad. And even though it sounds a little aggressive, it's more of take anger that comes with trauma, and instead of being destructive with anger, be constructive with it. So, building relationships, building your own advocacy skills, building communication and that understanding of this is how I like to be communicated to. This is what doesn't work for me. These are, my triggers. Doctors know what works for you. And then you can also say, what is the best kind of communication style for you guys to make a good kind of back and forth relationship.
Yeah, I was just surprised to see the word P.O.P. I was a little thrown off by it. I was doing my research.
Yeah.
You're like if you just say like, oh, I have an organization called P.O.P. and it's like the last thing you think of is medical.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's a little catchy.
No, it definitely catchy. I love to say the word P.O.P. So thank you for letting me use the word P.O.P.
No problem.
Mentioned before that you hold bi-weekly meetings. So like what do you wish people would understand when they come to your meetings?
That you don't have to talk, you can just listen. They're very casual. We always assign a topic with it. That could be the 5 stages of grief, delayed trauma, symptoms of medical PTSD, but the conversation often kind of goes in its own direction. So it's not like I'm like, no, we have to stay on topic. Very free form. Or, if you're nervous, you can always, touch base with me one-on-one beforehand and I can give you a download. But, it's just really an open conversation and just kind of everybody, venting a little bit, listening to each other, giving each other feedback.
Yeah, it's a free therapy section, but not licensed and just real talk.
Yeah, it's a free therapy session, but I'm not a therapist. It's a free
Yeah.
time to talk.
Well, like a therapist, just in general, it's sometimes getting to the process is always difficult, and then just starting to open up is difficult. For one, you don't want to talk to a brand new person. That's
Yeah.
for if you really have medical PTSD, that can be really hard to do because you're just so used to not for people not listening to you. So that's like not good at all for your job. But and then two is that yeah, just everyone knows what you're going through, so it's like a common acceptance of your situation where a therapist wouldn't know what to do. They're just there to like listen and then like I guess
Yeah,
give
yeah.
you feedback and like
Or even
tell
just
you the
like
truth.
talking to somebody who already knows what it's like.
Like the way I go through life is like people want it, but like they don't really want it. Is a person that tells the truth of the situation. So like I'm sure you've been in a situation where you have to tell them the truth, even though it's like really hard to talk to a chronic ill person because like you feel for them and like you want to comfort them, but at the same time you also like to tell them like the truth and like we all know if you have any problem, you are the only one that can help yourself. Like a therapy session, I like when I was really down. A therapy is just something is like the support group is just something to help you like get back on your feet again and then you go bigger and bigger. Like the
There
long term
hasn't
goal is you don't want to be in a meeting every single time. You kind of want them to
Yeah,
go and then yeah.
or there's been a couple people that have come to groups and then haven't shown up, and some of them have reached back and been like, I didn't know I had this, and I've been able to talk to a therapist since then. I would say the discussion groups, it's mostly listening. I don't really put myself in a position where I say, no, this is what you're feeling, because you know,
Hmm.
there isn't that rapport there. Plus, I really don't know what people are feeling. Only we as individuals know what we're feeling. But there are definitely times when somebody's vented a lot and people have been like, well, have you considered this? Or, I was in a similar situation and it went like this. So just more of giving advice or giving feedback instead of saying, like, no.
It's a very difficult talk, and it's like let's say they don't do therapy at all. It's
Hmm.
not something you can solve within one. It takes
Yeah.
many, like if you're doing once a week, it takes many months to even accept yourself and start to become. Cause you always like everybody always had that one therapy session where they just like unleash everything,
Yeah.
and then like you feel terrible, but then you kind of feel like a sense of calmness and like
Yeah, because you got it out there.
yeah, like we go back to like if you accept the truth, then you can start building up on it again. If you don't have a solid foundation, then it'll just never you will never
Yeah.
build a house.
Yeah.
So I know you also talk to health practitioners. So what
Yeah.
do you wish they would mother flippin' understand?
A lot. I think that our healthcare system is kind of put patients in this situation where it's almost kind of like removing the emotions from being sick, but that's not possible. You're always gonna kind of have that emotional part, and I wish there was a lot more training on bedside manner or communication or negotiation in medical schools. That's why I'm happy that so many, medical schools have been interested in me talking to some of their students, or the students themselves are interested in hearing from me. I think things like, making eye contact, walking to inpatient room or a clinic room and not being distracted. You're in this room right now. This is your focus. So doing things like sitting down and being on eye level, or body language check, or the tone of voice that you use when communicating. Like, you don't want to be too aggressive or sound anxious, because the patients will pick up on that. Communication that's direct and not kind of all over the place, so that everybody understands what's happening. Having the ability to answer questions directly on a level that the patient will understand, but also having that teaching factor in. Like, I may not understand what this term means, so tell me what this term means, or why does it matter if I have too high of level of this in my blood? What's the long-term implications? Because for me as a patient, unless I understand why something's bad, I'm probably not going to refer to it as something bad. I need to know what the long-term effects are on my body. So those are some of the things that I wish were taught in medical school or that, doctors, providers knew today. It's a really hectic system, and taking that time to kind of slow down a little bit.
Yeah, and it's difficult too to walk into a room and everyone had like different personalities and how they accept things. So like I'm pretty blunt about it, and it has the pros and the cons. So, like I'm just more directed, but I'm also sarcastic with it if they don't
Mhm.
understand sarcasm, and then it's like they write something
Same.
down and you're just like, oh no, what's happening?
Yeah, one
But
of my
yeah.
favorite jokes is that they're like, when I was younger and my dad would come in with me, they'd be like, "And who is this person?" I'd be like, "I don't know. I found him in an alley."
Yeah, it's just different vibe. It's hard to explain, but it sucks. Like they try to make it better, like they did rebuild the hospital to like nicer now. But like I don't know, there's just something about it that is like you gotta like go there to like understand it. It's like
Yeah.
you like hear screeching, but like there's really no screeching and such, and like I don't know, it's like a horror movie kind of feeling. Everything is super clean. I mean it has to be, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's
Hospitals are
like
so beige,
yeah, that I
beige and white.
make it more like comfy. I want to say that the hospital, like for the kids, like they make it better. Like they have like a drawing room and stuff. So it's much like you can like enter a brand new world. But like yeah, make these rooms like more like pleasant. Like add some color to it. Like make it. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, why don't adults get that? I mean, I don't necessarily want to be in a room that has like, Disney princesses all over it, or like I don't know, the Backyardians. I don't know who the Backyardians are, but I know they're a thing. But I don't know, a room that, like in DC, for example, I think it'd be kind of cool to be in a room that's kind of maybe like George Washington themed, and then here's some facts about him, or, here's some of that colonial look, or, because I like reading
mm,
things.
yeah, I mean that'd be cool for like you, but like for me, if I walk into a room, like I'm like I feel like I'd be like going to a something mentally wrong with me. Like why am I here? Like uh,
I love history.
like
I
imagine you
love
waking
learning about
up and
history.
yeah, like imagine waking up and you just see George Washington face looking at you.
I think that'd be pretty dope, honestly.
I don't know, I'd be a little intimidated. Like in the middle of the night, and just he just sees you looking at you. Like I think that would give me some PTSD right there.
Okay, so maybe I don't know. Or like I like food. Again, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a nerd, but maybe like I don't know. Like
I clouds. Let's do clouds.
yeah, clouds are fine. I was thinking like maybe a room that's themed on how hot dogs are made.
They should do like escape rooms. That'd be really cool. Like have like a
Yeah, yeah, or I don't know if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, maybe like do that
yeah,
theme.
like a bank vault would be really cool.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones. That'd be cool. I'm
Yeah, so like for anybody who plans the designs for hospitals right now, you should talk to the both of
yeah.
us. We don't
ab-
agree on it. I would like the hot dog room, please.
Yeah, and then like different chairs would help too, like not
Yeah,
hospital
not these
chair.
clinicals
Yeah,
where
just make
I
it
don't
like
know.
comfy.
Yeah, I
But
agree. Doesn't have to
um
be so sterile looking.
no, but before I take a mic away from you, is there anything you wanna say, promote, any words of wisdom, the lottery numbers, and the mic is all yours.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to, check out discussion group if they'd like. The website is www.popmedicalptsd.com, or, reach out directly if you have questions. Always looking for volunteers in social media. So if you, really are passionate and want to do more, help me with social media. I'm too old for it. I don't understand it. Or, if you just kind of want to help in any kind of way, let me know. And that's
Okay,
it.
so thank you, Emily. All her links will be in the description below. Thank you, Emily, for giving me your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And I'll see everyone next time. Bye.
Bye bye.